do that, how you do that is by working on your mind. That's Buddha's expertise. Buddha's your best cognitive behavioral therapist. And that's not being kind of clever. And he beat the neuroscientists to it by about 2,500 years. They think they discovered the idea that by having new thoughts, you can develop new neural pathways in your brain or something. Buddha's been telling us that for quite a while, but he just doesn't use the word brain. He talks about the actual cognitive, subjective part of it. That's the Buddhist approach. When he slices it right down to the very essence, that's the Buddhist approach. So let's see what we can find in these ideas to use in our daily lives. Thinking this is why we're sitting here, to take some methods away. If anybody has any points to bring up or questions, please say them now. Nothing? People online? Good on you. Go.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
Venerable, I just finished reading Vicky McKenzie's book on Lama Zopa Rinpoche.
Oh, yes. Very good. Yes.
And it has very detailed accounts of Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa.
That's it.
So I had two interrelated questions. One is, if you just had any personal reflections or if there's anything about those three lamas that you usually convey to students. And secondly, for me and for those of us who never met any of the three of them, how should we think about those teachers, given that we are very much following within their tradition?
I understand. Yeah, I understand. Well, I suppose it's a bit like you're studying tennis with Roger Federer, and then you read a book about this genius tennis player, you know, that he knew in the 70s or something, that you were before you were born or something like that. Right. So how would you think about that? Well, obviously, if Roger Federer is the product of those teachers, and if you think he's a pretty cool tennis player, then that's, first of all, that's kind of reinforcing your confidence that you've chosen a good tennis coach, isn't it? That literally is the approach, actually. I mean, Lama Zopa Rinpoche happened to be my teachers, the ones I first met in the 70s, actually, when I first heard about the Buddhist teachings. So, you know, there's different, I mean, like in any, I always use the ordinary examples like tennis and things because we get that. But as soon as it comes to spiritual, we get a bit weird, you know, talking about gurus and we're a bit mystical about it, but it's exactly the same approach. And we're very rigorous about it in ordinary life. When it comes to cooking and tennis, you're not going to leap in and believe any old idiot who tells you how to cook, make a cake if you haven't checked on them first. There's no way we'd do that. We're very clear in doing our due diligence. You know, we don't make it. But when it comes to spiritual, we're a bit weird. But it's exactly that approach. Exactly that approach. So, you know, the way to think about it, if you're playing tennis, if you're learning tennis from Roger Federer and you read about his coaches, that would reinforce, wouldn't it? You reinforce your confidence in your choices, and so you'd continue practicing, basically. I mean, that's about it. And if you read anything from them that will help you understand it better, then go for it. You know, that's the approach. I mean, they happen to be my teachers, and so you come to a place like this, which is a center of theirs, part of the organization. Then you check up on, say, the teacher who comes here. There's some teachers who come here. And then you check that their teachers are Lama Zopa Rinpoche. I mean, it's just like that. It makes sense. And it's important we do this checking. Because, I mean, maybe with tennis as well, there are some pretty wacky people out there who say they're good at it, but actually aren't, you know, aren't qualified. I mean, that's really common in the West. Anybody will put a placard up and say they're this and they're that. So we need to check. We absolutely, especially when it comes to spiritual teachings, I think it's really crucial to check up carefully. You know, if you plan to go more deeply with that person, you check up, you come listen, then you do your due diligence, and you check up, and you're not sure. Then okay, you leave it. We've really got to do that. That's extremely important. And then eventually, if you continue to practice and you go down that track, and the teachings start getting, obviously the techniques and the teachings become more refined. I always use the example of yoga. Yoga is yoga, but I mean, we all know there's 72,000 variations of yoga. You can go to 72 different yoga places and learn a little bit, but if you start going deeper, you've got to choose one. It's obvious, because this one will say, put your leg this way, and the other one will say, no, you put your leg that way. You can't do both. So you've got to choose in the end. And if you cultivate a practice, then you naturally will go deeper. So that implies, and that eventually you'll, that's a very nice teacher over there, but you prefer this one. That's completely reasonable and appropriate. But you've got to be clear, as Pavanka Rinpoche says, one of these early 20th century Tibetan lamas, he says, you better choose your teachers very carefully because you're going to end up like them. It's very good advice. It's my favorite sentence in his entire 1,000 pages of that book. Very practical. So that's my answer. I don't want to answer the first part. Just read their books. Okay. Well, no, I mean, if I'm their disciple, then I'm the proof of the pudding, aren't I? So then, aren't I? Do you see my point? So then, that's logical. What else, people? Yes.
Hi, Venerable.
Okay.
Building from that, what are the key red flags for a false teacher?
No, it's a really good point. I mean, in all the ancient texts, they list all these lists of qualifications, 10 of this and blah, blah, blah. You can go through all of those. But I suppose the essence of it, I mean, if it's tennis and you start, I think one of the ways to check is when you first start, you have no clue what good tennis looks like. It's really logical. So you can't go, oh, wow, Roger Federer must be good. So then what do? Is you check on his peers and his reputation. That surely has to be the first step. And that has to give you some confidence, doesn't it? That, I think, is a really reason why the spiritual teacher, because how can you know if you walk in here and hear a person for the first time and you don't know anything about Buddhism, how can you possibly judge? You might like or not like the person, but that's not always a valid criterion to use. You understand? It might not be. You understand? So you've really got to check on you've got to do the due diligence, the place, but I think the signs of a teacher who's not valid is they probably don't have a good lineage. I mean, especially it's so strong. This is a really, again, I have to keep using ordinary examples because it just makes sense, I mean, my mother was a classical musician, right? And I think in our Western modern music, classical music, there's such an incredible, rigorous attitude towards that. I mean, I remember reading an entire thesis somebody had written about the use of a car horn in an orchestra playing some 1940s, I forget, one of those famous American composers. It was a modern orchestra piece, and one of the instruments was a 1930s car horn. The entire thesis about which kind of car horn. I mean, that's rigorous, right? Do you see my point? It almost sounds like laughable because they take the lineage seriously. So, I mean, if you're checking, so then that makes real sense. So same, absolutely. This is with certainly the Tibetan tradition. So if you hear, like when you go to seriously in study, say in the Tibetan Buddhist monastic university system, and you enjoy a course, let's say, like for example, in our several of our centers, we have these 5-year and 7-year philosophical courses. The first thing you're going to hear, the first thing you're going to get when you get the text, is you'll get the lineage. And they'll track it. And even sometimes in some of the prayers they do, they're very elaborate. You'd visualize every single lineage person right back to Buddha, and you do your prayers and your things to that because you check the lineage is valid. That makes sense. I mean, my mother, if I wanted to check that she was a good musician, she'd check with her teacher this, and you get back to Bach. And if you can track that back in an unbroken series of real human beings, that's a valid lineage. But if it stops somewhere where somebody made up a few bit of stuff in 1920 and they don't track back to anybody, you better question that. If it's Bach you want to study, you get my point. If it's the 1920s guy, then fine. He started his own trip. And people do that every day, especially when it comes to spiritual. Do you understand? So that's the general approach. And then slowly, if you like a certain person, you start to check. Then they ought to put, I don't know, we say in America, you put your money where your mouth is. Yeah. They've got to put their money where their mouth is. So what we're dealing here with isn't tennis or cakes or music. It's behavior and the mind. So it's hard to know a person's mind, but somehow you can look at their behavior because the body and the speech are just the expression of what's in their mind. So, if someone's behaving in a way that's contrary to the very words they're saying, that's a red flag. Or you hear rumors about things. Okay, we all gossip. So check up on them to see if they're valid. And if it's true, then you just be cautious. Do you understand? I think that's the one, especially with spiritual teachings. That makes sense. Does it make sense? Yeah, I think so. So, is there a particular point you want to talk about? A point and go into more depth? Like, I mean, some of you I haven't met before, have I? I've met some of you before. Okay. I'm sure I've seen you before.
Yeah.
That's right. I thought so.
I'm new and I have a question.
Good, darling, go for it. Yes.
No, because you were talking about you becoming your teachers and how important it is to follow lineage.
Yeah.
In the chat.
Yeah.
But how do you see the evolution of the practice? Because music evolves, tennis evolves, swimming evolves,
So what do you mean by what evolves? The system evolves or the person evolves? Which one?
the system.
Oh,
The
what-
system. If you get like arrested for something, and then you try it, you can, with your own experience after doing it many years, start doubting it and changing.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, good. It's a very good point. Now that's a really interesting point. Yeah.
It's a little bit about conserving the teachings of Buddha involvement to adaptation to the real world.
I understand. No, well, that actually, if the teachings of the Buddha aren't about the real world, then they're not valid. It doesn't look like they're like the real world. We somehow put them in the sky. We put spiritual teachings in the sky. And then you hear about people going off into a cave for 10 years. You think, what's that got to do with the real world? So we've got to understand what he's on about. That's a really good question. So, okay. Oh, excuse me. Okay. So the essence of what Buddha's saying, if we take the Mahayana, there's different tracks in Buddhism. Then we take the Mahayana track, which is the one you're going to be hearing in Tibetan Buddhist centers, as opposed to in Burmese and Thai centers. I mean, there's different traditions. Then the end result, okay, the essence of what Buddha is saying, the bottom line is this, and it's indicated by this word Buddha. It's very tasty. The etymology of this word is very tasty. No, I'm sorry. Bud in Sanskrit, Bud, and the Tibetan equivalent, Sangye, Buddha. I think the first syllable, the etymology is it implies the eradication from the mind, the person, the eradication of all neuroses, all ego, all misconceptions, all delusions, all misery, all unhappiness, all suffering. All of that is utterly and completely gone. That first syllable implies the achievement of that. The second syllable implies the achievement of the development to perfection of everything else in the mind. Goodness, virtue, clarity, wisdom. I mean, these words are kind of simple and cute, but this is the absolute, all that's based on this clear presentation of the Buddhist view of the mind. So we have neurotic, deluded, I-based, fear-based, unhappy, deluded states of mind that Buddha has found from his own direct experience are the source of all suffering, as big as that statement is, and that they can be eradicated. They're not at the core of our being. They're adventitious. This is a fundamental point in Buddhist psychology, which is completely different from our philosophical materialist views, from the neuroscientific views. It's like a joke to say you can get rid of all anger, jealousy, depression, anxiety, fears, and then develop your mind to perfection and goodness and wisdom and only have that. That seems like psychotic in our culture because we give equal status to all of that stuff and assume a person has a bit of all of those. That's the view in the modern world and the neuroscientific world. This is, in that sense, radically different. So to understand that, then you have to understand what the mind is, which essentially is not physical. It is not a handiwork of a mother or father. It's not the handiwork of a creator. It is not a function of the brain. It's not physical. And it has these far more subtle levels that one can access using these genius methods these Indians invented 3,000 years ago. As the Dalai Lama says, and I always quote, it was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began the investigation to the nature of self. And they utilized this brilliant technique they invented to enable us to plumb the depths of our mind, this consciousness which is not physical, which has these subtle levels, and to then do the work of eradicating the nonsense of development to perfection, this virtue and wisdom. So when you've perfected that, you're a Buddha. That's the end result. So this is where it sounds insane, but I'm going to say it because it's answering your question about whether you develop Buddhist teachings. Is there anywhere to go after this? Well, if you have accomplished this, and all Buddhist methodology is the system to help you get this, your consciousness, which is not physical, when it's finally unencumbered by all delusions, will be omniscient, quite literally. This is where they agree with the Christians, except it's not called God. And it's not a creator. Buddha says everybody has this potential. Your mind would have the wisdom that sees things as they exist. Your consciousness, which is not physical, will pervade the universe. There is nowhere where it won't be. You'll have infinite wisdom to see the minds of all suffering sentient beings and know exactly how to help them. You'll have the infinite compassion to want to help them, and you'll have the power to do so. Now, as insane and scientific and science fiction-ish that sounds like, that's what Buddha has found to be true, and all the methodology will lead you to that. So if there's more than that you can develop, if you can develop more than that, then please do so. So are we communicating here to answer your question? So you once you establish that this is where you're going, let's say you decide where you're going is that, then when, if you ended up in Tibet, and then you were practicing the different techniques that they use, certain practices they do, the rituals and things, you might not do those in Thailand. You might not do those in Japan. But the point is, if these techniques that you do that are very cultural won't lead you to end up with that, then it's just phony rubbish. But if it's a valid technique, if it will lead you to that, then it's valid. So do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's it.
And then you agree that you can adapt the technique while you to get to that.
Well, it's just like with the music. If you haven't yet studied all the theories, you can't just suddenly play the piano. And what do we say the jazz piano? What do the jazz musicians do? They what's the word? Improvise. How can you improvise? You haven't got the basis. You can improvise if you go in the recipes. You can't just chuck in 4 eggs and see what happens. But if you know about it, then of course you would do that. And it's all valid. It's completely reasonable. But it's based on the fundamentals that you've learned, isn't it?
Yeah.
Get your fundamentals clear. And we get that when it comes to any scientific or practical approach in the West. That's exactly the same here. Anything that you can discover yourself that no one on the planet does that helps you see your delusions, honey child, it's a valid method. Do you see what I'm pointing? But you've got to be very authentic and very humble and clear and be steady in your practice and not just make up rubbish, Do you understand? Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Good, I'm happy. All right. So what else, people? So no, I mean, what Buddha's suggesting is pretty insane. That your mind pervades the universe. It sees everything that exists. It's including all the minds of all sentient beings, all their past and future. You have infinite compassion for everyone as if they were you, because you've cut all sense of a neurotic sense of separate I. And you'd have the power to be of benefit to each of them. I'm sorry, I finished the final point. I forgot the final point. That power includes the ability to manifest your mind in countless bodies throughout countless universes and countless eons for the sake of countless sentient beings. That's long term, okay? Don't hold your breath. So, of course, that's a pretty huge statement, like a joke almost. So you don't just swallow that whole. It's like if you, again, I have to use examples. If you go to Einstein, you heard that he's a mathematician and you've hardly learned 1 + 1 is 2. And then you hear him raving on about this complicated physics, you think the man's insane. You don't just chuck him out. You check his reputation. You check to see where he's come from, what his system is, what his methods are. And then you go, well, I'd like to be like that. So you follow his methodology. And that's all he's saying to you. So, I mean, we tend to think the spiritual, and this is reasonable. I mean, I quote this a lot. It's really true, When we think of spiritual in our culture, we think religion, we assume creator. The default view is religion equals believing in a creator, quote unquote. That's what Islam is. That's what Christianity is. And even Hinduism, which talks about karma as well, still has a view of some essential energy that's the source of everything. The Greeks call it an essence or something. There's always this view. So that's a philosophical view that Buddha diverged from. His teachings about emptiness and dependent arising is where he diverged from that point. So there's no view in Buddhism of some kind of person running the show. No view like that. No view like that. That every being. So what I'm getting at is, therefore, we think you can't prove religion, because if you can prove that God is right, then that means you're also God, and you cannot say that. You just can't say that. Whereas you can prove that Buddha's right, because Buddha's a regular guy like you who went through this system, and he says, just like Einstein, here's my method, over to you, babe, if you see if it works for you, And if you discover, as the Dalai Lama tells us, as you tick the boxes as you go, you check that he's wrong in what he suggests will be the next step, then you must reject him. So the onus in Buddhism is totally on oneself to do the work. Not just sit there and blindly believe, swallow it whole. And again, I use the ordinary example of daily life. This person in New Zealand was a scientist. He said to me, it was a brilliant question. I've never had it before or since. He said, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? Which is perfect when it comes to creator religions. That's the assumption he had. And I said, would you ask Einstein who revealed the teachings on relativity to him? And of course he laughed, because of course you don't. Why? Because we know he used his own noggin observing, this is the point now, observing the world in front of him, didn't just sit in the sky, put together certain observations and then certain rules, codify them, and then presented them. He said, here are my findings. Over to you. He's not asking you to believe him. He's not asking you to swallow it whole. He says, follow my methodology, you'll come to the same conclusion. So that's all Buddha's saying. It's not just, and it's not intellectual, it's experiential. So the onus is on us. But the view of, no creator, I mean, if you're a materialist, basically you track yourself back to your mother and father and grandma and grandpa, then back to the monkeys. That's the way we think, because we're only talking the physical. And you're right when it comes to the physical. But the Buddha would disagree fundamentally with the Western modern view, or the materialist philosophical view, that consciousness is in its nature physical. Brain, we have a brain, no problems. Problems, as I say in Australia, no problems. We have a brain, but that's not your consciousness. And that's the major point. So you can't prove that in the beginning. It's like you can't prove that equals MC squared. So you take it as your hypothesis. You move towards it. This huge point in Buddhism. I mean, everybody who practices Buddhism doesn't particularly care much about all the big picture. I just happen to like the big picture. I find it very empowering. So, so this approach here then, I mean, somebody recently who's practicing Buddhism said, do you have doubts, Robina, about is reincarnation true, for example? Well, I have no clue if it's true. I don't have clairvoyance. I can't see. I've never had a single glimpse of a memory of any past life. But if I listen to the Buddha's teachings and take the view, which needs to be a coherent presentation of it, that's my working hypothesis. I can't prove equals MC squared yet, but it's my working hypothesis. That's completely valid. Nothing wrong with that. It's not a question of believing. I never use the word belief. My working hypothesis, based on the understanding of the Buddha's view of what the mind is, how it functions, the law of karma, all of these things fit together within this big picture of consciousness that doesn't come from mummy, daddy, creator, that doesn't come from nothing, isn't physical, and has its own continuity and goes back and back and back. It fits with the Buddhist explanation. So that's my working hypothesis. So that seems theoretically coherent to me. And then as we practice, eventually we'll get the experience of it as we go deeper and deeper into our own mind using Buddha's methods. So I'm going one step at a time. And it's not as if you just swallow it whole and just do it. You use your intelligence. You use your wisdom, just like you would with anything else, to put it together and go then one step at a time. One step at a time. It's a slow, gradual process. So this is a general approach. And if you like that, that's great. And then studying all the views, studying this world view is something that, many people like to do, and it's available to us now in English. Stuff that they studied 20, 30 years in the Tibetan monastic university system, which came from the great Indian system in Nalanda monastery in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th centuries, India. But, each one of us takes it differently. Each one of us goes in a certain direction. Some people simply like to do a little practice every day in order to become a slightly happier, wiser human being. Nothing wrong. You can decide yourself to the degree to which you go into it. You're the boss, not the Buddha. So there's different ways of entering into Buddhism, different doorways. There's this one approach, which is learning the entire worldview, because Buddhism is indeed a coherent worldview, coherent within its own logic, of course. It is that. It might be a surprise to us. We don't think of it as that. It is that. So it's up to us. We want to go into it. It is also a method. This is a fundamental starting point, really. The very first teaching Buddha gave, the Four Noble Truths, when he first himself got enlightened, quote unquote, accomplished this Buddhahood, quote unquote. He went to, was in Bodh Gaya, and he walked a few days west, I think, goes to Varanasi. And there's this place he used to go to before that when he was a Hindu in his practices. He came out of this amazing Hindu system. Deer Park, this wonderful place. It's still there now. The Indian government takes care of these marvelous places. You can do these pilgrimages to these places where the Buddha went. So at Deer Park, he taught his first teaching, the Four Noble Truths, the four truths, the four facts about life. For the noble ones, those who've accomplished it, those who've realized it. And the framework there is suffering. So the first one is there is suffering. The second is there are causes. The third is you can be free of suffering and its causes. And the fourth is how to do it. The methodology is pretty straightforward. Of course, when you read the text, it's all very arcane. It's talked in, if you read the Tibetan stuff, it's just as if you were there in the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th century. And you read the Indian text, it's there if you're there 2,500 years ago. The text is still in that language, which gives the authenticity. But that's why it's so important to also have the modern commentaries on these texts, which is the masters of today, the holy beings of today, whom you check up on to see that they're valid. So one approach to Buddhism is what is suffering? What is it? What are the causes? And then how do you get rid of it? And that's very logical, because if you've got a problem, suffering, problem, whatever, you first have to establish exactly what it is. You have to locate it exactly. But crucially, in order to solve it, you've got to decide, this is an important point. In order to solve a problem, you have to know the cause of it. Not just know what the problem is. You have to know the cause of it, because that implies the solution. It's a really important point. So Buddhism talks about 3 levels of suffering. The first kind that we all know about, he calls it the suffering of suffering. But there are subtler, more nuanced levels as well. That's one approach. And it's very experiential. We all know we don't want suffering, even the gross kind. Not to mention not even knowing the subtler ones. So it's a method for getting rid of suffering. Who's suffering? You're suffering. So logically then, of course, if once you've discovered suffering and its causes, then you look around you, you say, my God, we're all in the same boat, everyone's the same. That's when you start to want to help others. You've got to sort it out for yourself first. So it's a very internal, there's an analogy, a bird needs 2 wings, wisdom and compassion. Compassion wing, that's the point. You live in this world with others, so you want to be of benefit, but you've got to get the wisdom wing together first, which is putting yourself together. Knowing your own suffering, the cause of your own suffering, be sick of it and want to get rid of it, and then practice. Then that stops you, become you as a result of that, even simply speaking. The consequence of that is you become less neurotic, less miserable, less lonely, less bereft, less unhappy, less up and down like a yo-yo, less jealous, depressed, and so on and so forth. Therefore, more stable within yourself, more content within yourself, therefore, more connected to others, because it's the presence. And this is Buddha's key in the second noble truth, his key points about what are the causes of suffering. This is where it's pretty shocking to us. There are 2 main causes, and they're both inside oneself. So the solution is inside oneself. That's pretty shocking to us. The first is the neurotic states of mind. These are the source of all suffering in the universe, as far as Buddha is concerned. It's a very clear presentation. And then on the basis of having a body and speech, we then do actions based on those neuroses, these delusions in the mind, ego grasping, the root delusion that believes utterly and primordially in a definite, solid, independent, separate, bereft, lonely, concrete me. This is in the bones of our being. This is the source of all suffering, of all beings in the universe, which is a pretty subtle point. On the basis of that, grasping at this sense of me, then the main delusion that is given rise from that is the attachment, this bottomless pit, this emotional hunger to get what that poor me wants, and then the panic attack when it doesn't get it. These are the 3 poisons: ignorance, attachment, and aversion. These words are so cute, but if we can begin to understand, first theoretically and then experientially, just that, this is already you really practicing profoundly. So Buddha's essential point is that suffering and happiness mainly come from the mind, from our way of seeing things. So his main practice is changing the mind. But the first level is too complicated. So he says, just control the servants of your mind first, Robina. Control your body and speech, honey. At least don't kill and steal and lie and jump on the wrong partner. Why not, Buddha? Not because he says so. And that's the Christian answer. And this is, again, a crucial distinction. Always quote this. I asked my Jesuit priest friend, when Jesus says don't kill and don't steal and don't lie, and you've got to ask him why not. Don't just do what he says. Why not, Jesus? Well, honey, it's because God said so. And there's nothing wrong with that answer, but it is not Buddha's answer. It's natural law for the Buddha. That's the major difference of a view of a creator. Nothing wrong with having belief in a creator. Buddha would argue with it. Of course you do what God wants, because God's the boss. Not here. You don't do what Buddha wants because he's the boss. He's not the boss. You don't believe in E equals MC squared because Einstein said. What a joke. So you don't kill and don't steal and don't lie. And this is the point that we find quite hard to get in the modern world. And this is the law of karma. We find it really hard to see that why I should control my body and speech and not kill and steal and lie. Because we think I'm allowed to do what I like. I'm allowed to think what I like. I'm allowed to say what I like. Yes, you are. But the Buddha is very simply saying everything we think and do and say has consequences. To whom? First of all, you. We produce ourselves. We produce ourselves is really the essential point. The Dalai Lama says the law of karma is like self-creation. It's a very shocking point, but for me, it's the most delicious. When I first heard the teachings when I was 30 or something, that's the piece that was missing in my life, you know. This concept of karma. Self-creation, Dalai Lama calls it this. Is a really nice way of putting it. That basically whatever we think and do and say is the main player in who we become, not the outside world. And therefore it's got zero to do with judgment and punishment and reward, which is the belief in which is very deep in our bones. You mightn't believe in a creator, but you believe that mummy and daddy made you and that they're the boss. And that's why you have guilt. You're not supposed to, you've internalized since you were tiny, don't do this and don't do that and don't do this and don't do that. And you're terrified of being judged and punished, so you don't do it. It's the same view as having a creator. It's dualistic for the Buddha. The reason not to kill and steal and lie is because it's going to hurt you, Robina. You program yourself. Who wants to be programmed to a stealer, a killer, and a liar? No, thank you. So we produce ourselves. So the main source of our suffering, and therefore the main source of our happiness, is within here. And that's the essence of being a Buddhist. That's the actual fundamental point. And that means we have to become intimately familiar with our own mind. Not just how it thinks and feels, roughly what is this? You've got to have a model. You got to, you can't just put your hands on the piano and go twinkle, twinkle and hope that bark comes out. You've got to put your piece of paper on the front with Bach's notations on it and you follow the instructions. Here we're using Buddha's model of the mind, Buddha's music. That's our choice. You can use Jesus if you want to. You make up your own, no problem. But here we're talking Buddha. So you have Buddha's views about what the mind is. You study it and learn it, then you apply it here. And as I said, the key distinction, which is indicated by this word Buddha, Bud, get rid of all the rubbish, Da, develop all the goodness. He makes this clear distinction. This is quite unique to Buddhist psychology. Distinction between the neurotic, I-based, fear-based, distorted, delusional, distressing, afflicted, neurotic, mistaken, all these words, states of mind that are the source of our pain and therefore the source of distorting the world. As Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, the world appears back to us in the aspect, or if you like, through the lenses of whatever's in your mind. So learning to know your own mind is the job to be done. And then learn to reconfigure your mind, be your own therapist. Like I said, Buddha's your best cognitive behavioral therapist, not kidding. So when you become to the wisdom wing, you've liberated yourself from suffering and its causes. Then now you can go to the compassion wing, or even before that, but the compassion wing is now on the basis of knowing yourself well, identifying the suffering, being sick of it, and seeing the pain of it and wanting to go beyond it. You then go, oh my God, we're in the same boat. And then you have empathy, and now you're more connected to others, and you're able to, and now you're qualified to help them. So another doorway into Buddhism is this one is developing wisdom. It sounds very abstract to us. Wisdom, what does that mean? Well, it's really crucial to understand this because the reason we suffer, Buddha says, is because these neurotic states of mind are misconceptions. This is very surprising. It's only when we start to know our mind more deeply and practicing through meditation to become familiar with what is beyond the emotional component, which is when we feel things through our body, which is the only time we notice what we're thinking. We start to pay attention ever more deeply, ever more deeply, ever more deeply. And all those emotions, which are just the tip of the iceberg for the Buddha, are underpinned by these powerfully programmed conceptual stories deep in the bones of our beings. deep in the bones of our being. So they've got all the delusions. That's why they're called delusions, a great word in English. Ego grasping, the root, attachment, aversion, jealousy, low self-esteem, arrogance, you name it, we know them intimately. They're emotionally painful and they're misconceptions. They're rooted in being misconceptions at a very subtle level. The virtuous qualities, love, compassion, kindness, relatively speaking, are valid because they're connected to others. Dependent arising is the root of how things exist in Buddhist teachings. It's the flip side of, in the wisdom one, which it seems to be more subtle about emptiness, how things, nothing have an intrinsic nature. The flip side of that is dependent arising. Everything exists interdependently. So love and compassion and kindness and empathy and goodness are connected to dependent arising, are connected to dependence. They're interdependent. There's a sense of connectedness with others when they are prevailing. When the others prevail, you know it. You're isolated, lonely, bereft, cut off, concrete, set in stone, miserable. There's no sense of other because they're rooted in the misconception of ego grasping. So wisdom is what you get as you lessen the neuroses. One, you also get more contentment and less pain, and you get more clarity, which is another word for wisdom. More sense, and therefore more connected to others. It helps you move towards empathy and compassion. So because what it's saying, the key characteristic of these emotional problems, these emotional afflictions, as they call them in Buddhist psychology, is that they're delusional. They're misconceptions. And it's hard to hear that initially. But once we start to become familiar with the model of the mind and then apply it to ourselves, we're going to see that. And this is the revelation. And we really start to understand Buddha. So getting wisdom is the method to stop suffering. So they're utterly linked. So the entry into the wisdom one, entry to the suffering and happiness one. Any questions from those people? Wants to go into more deeply? Oh.
Reverend Robina.
Hello,
Hi.
yes, sweetheart, talk to me.
I have a question about one of the paramitas. I was wondering, how can I cultivate more resilience?
Which parameter is that?
I think it's called virya.
Who?
Virya?
I don't speak that language.
Oh, okay.
What is it in
I
English?
think it means.
You mean perseverance?
Yes.
Or, okay, there's different words for it. It's very good question. Let's go into it. It's a very good question.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is in the more advanced stages of the Bodhisattva path. Once you've done the wisdom wing, then you go to the compassion, you cultivate bodhicitta, this outrageous shift in the mind that now causes you to only want to help others. And then from life to life, you bop along, perfecting these 6 perfections, the culmination of which is your Buddhahood. So the first 4 are all the work you do in relation to others. They're perfecting the compassion wing. And the last 2 are what you do in your own meditation, where you're perfecting wisdom. So the first one is called, the first of these 4, it's called generosity, which is a very powerful quality. I'll just focus on yours. I'll just get to it. It's a very powerful quality of feeling. I mean, first, generosity of just being physically generous, materially generous. It's an indication, isn't it? If a person's very materially generous, they're usually generous in their heart as well, usually, unless they've got a wrong motivation. They just want to be seen as rich, and famous or something. So generosity is a powerful step in the Bodhisattva path of opening yourself to others and seeing what can I do to help? How can I help? It's very powerful. So as you're practicing on the Bodhisattva path, as Lama Zopa says, you think of giving, not think of receiving. It's quite a shift in the mind. Then you get to the next one where you really start to practice a more profound level of connecting to others, which is the practice of wanting to help others. Not just be generous, but to really want to help others. The next one is the practice of patience, which is a huge one, which is really patience in the face of difficulties. It makes you stronger, And the fourth one, and this is the most important of the 4, without this, you can't be successful, they call it either perseverance, or you said resilience, good word, or you make, and the way to do that is, the way to get that is or enthusiasm, they say, enthusiasm, and the way to do that, another word for it is you make effort, and even joyful effort. These are different terms. So we've got to look at, looking at the opposite, it tells us exactly what enthusiasm, joyful effort, and enthusiasm are. And it's quite a bit surprising to hear it. The opposite is laziness. So let's look at them, 3 kinds. So first of all, look at what effort means and enthusiasm. We want enthusiasm, we want resilience. So we've got to, but say, oh, you've got to make joyful effort. It sounds so exhausting. Joyful effort? What are you talking about, you know? And so we all know effort is so difficult. And that's a really good word. So think about this. First of all the Lamas say, there's no way in the world you're going to be enthusiastic about something. I'm not just talking ordinary world here, unless you know the benefits. You think about this. So even in ordinary world, if you don't know what an ice cream is, why would you be enthusiastic about getting it? But if you know the benefits of an ice cream, nothing's going to stop you from getting it. I'm talking simple example. So you've got to know the benefits. So of course here it's so much more difficult, because to see the benefits of a spiritual practice, it's great theory, but it's a bit exhausting. We give up too easily because it would seem so long distance, you know. So we've got to find a way to frame it to ourselves that gives us some courage to want to persevere. If you don't have that, why would you want to persevere? So, I mean, that's why I use the ordinary examples of the gym or anything you like. You know, you're 25 pounds overweight and you see these gorgeous pictures of these nice toned bodies, you're going to get excited. And that's your goal. And if you lose sight of that goal, honey, you'll stop going to the gym. It's very clear. And even if you don't lose sight, it's still hard to go to the gym because we get lazy. So you've got to really have a clear goal. And that's not easy when it comes to a spiritual path. So you've got to find a way to frame it to yourself, even in terms of being more content, more self-confident, more joyful. You understand? That seems pretty tasty, something to look forward to. That's minimum. So, okay, if that's so, what is this opposite? Look at what it is that prevents us from having this, making the joyful effort and getting this resilience and enthusiasm. And so laziness, and it sounds so surprising. It just sounds like your mother's telling you off, you know, but let's look at it. It's very, very clear. We'll all recognize there are 3 levels of it. The first one, we all know it, is can't be bothered, isn't it? So then analyze that. Really, it's so important. What is the thing? You think about this. What is it that you can't be bothered doing? And this is the point of it, is the thing that attachment doesn't want. So if we look at attachment, which we should learn back in junior school, the most basic one in Buddhism is to understand attachment, and we don't because we have a different view of it. His is such a profound view if we can get to see it. So attachment is multifaceted. Attachment is like emotional hunger. And it can be related to 1,000 different things. Some people are attached to cake, attached to bodies, attached to sex, attached to beautiful, shiny things, attached to money, you name it. There's limitless numbers of things we can be emotionally hungry for. Okay. So, but the most basic level is comfort, our comfort zone, emotional and physical comfort zone. Think about this. Think about that one. It's just huge, more than sex and drugs and rock and roll and everything. It's just this craving to feel comfortable. So it's the most obvious one if you go to the gym, and that's just talking samsara. You know, the second you're on the machine, you're doing your rowing or something, and you're doing your rowing, you're all happy. And then what happens? You start to puff and pant. Your muscles start to hurt. So you know, if you don't go beyond that point, beyond your comfort zone, if you don't go beyond that, even a little bit, you will never progress. So the moment our attachment stops getting what it wants, which is when that happens, that's when we give up. Do you hear me? This is the first most obvious level. So we're so junkies for just to be comfortable. So here we're talking spiritually, emotionally comfortable. So it really takes effort just to decide to do your practice every day, have discipline. You might not feel like it. Like anything, if you've decided there is benefit, again, using the ordinary example of the gym, you know you've got to go every day. You've got to just do the work, and you've got to puff and pant and not think I'm going to feel good when I come home. You probably feel worse, but you know you're on the right track. You've got the long view. If we don't have that, we will give up. And 99% of people have the same problem. We all give up, we give up, we give up because we're all bone lazy. Not putting us down, it's because we crave to feel comfortable. We don't like going out of our comfort zone. We know that phrase. That's called the most gross level of laziness. You hear me? The next one is really tricky. It seems like a virtue. Oh, I'm too busy. I'll do it later. Do you understand? That's like double trouble laziness. So you think, and again, the gym, I mean, what they talk about in the texts, the gym is an example. This is samsara. That's not even effort at all. That's just more attachment. But I'm using it as an analogy. It's a really obvious one. So the one of, you've got all excited. You've done a retreat and you're going to do your practice every morning. You're going to get up at 5:30 or 6, you've decided, and you're all excited. And the first morning you get up and you feel good about yourself. The next morning you get up, you feel good about yourself. But the third morning, maybe 7 mornings, you wake up, you're tired, and within 3 milliseconds, you can't be bothered, first one. And then you say, oh, and I'll do it later. And then you get yourself off the hook and you feel better about yourself and get back to sleep. Do you understand? Do we not all know this one? I mean, do we not hear this one? And it's in a millisecond. It's so quick, you don't even notice, It's so quick. And you kind of sigh with relief because you got yourself off the hook. Whew, I'll do it later. And we know later never comes. So you carry this burden like a tortoise, all these undone jobs, all these promises to yourself. And all the Lamas say, it's so interesting, all the Lamas say that one of the worst ways to die, it sounds so dramatic, is to have all these regrets of the things that you didn't do. One of my friends, same age as me, so it was always a wake-up call. She died, a nun in Australia, and the people who were with her said that she was sad at the end of her life. She said, and I really regret all the opportunities I didn't take, all the laziness, all the things I didn't do. And that doesn't mean you just have to put yourself down. It's very realistic. And we all know when we make effort, we feel good about ourselves. We all know it's far, even if you're just trying to give up eating too much cake, the attachment is yearning for the habit of having the cake. But the other part of you, the rigorous part that's trying to practice and be disciplined, it's more painful to say no, but I think the pleasure you get from saying no is far better than the pleasure of having the cake. The pleasure of getting yourself out of bed and doing your practice, even though it's tiring, is you feel much better because you encouraged yourself and you went against the old habit. Do you understand? So these we've got to catch like a hawk. They're so tricky, And the third kind, the worst of all, which doesn't always sound so evident, is, oh, no, I can't do that. That's not possible. I'm not capable. And that seems like humility. And it's the biggest lie of all because we are capable. Can you hear that one? I can't do that. That's not possible. So whether it's tennis or the gym or Buddhism, you see the Dalai Lama, oh, that's just the Dalai Lama. Oh, no, I couldn't be like that. So you put him up there in the sky and you leave him there. Well, that's insulting him. The only reason he's in a human body is to show us show us what to do. The only reason Federer teaches tennis is to show us that we can become like that. Not just, oh, look at Federer, I couldn't be like that. So the enthusiasm is the belief first, I can do it. A confidence, starting small, and then the discipline of going against the impulse. This is every second practice. This is powerful. And if we can have morality and generosity and the others till the cows come home. But if you haven't got this one, nothing will ever come. Nothing will ever achieve. We know this. Are we communicating? Good.
Yes. Can I give you an example?
No, don't need to. What do you mean an example? I mean, it should be too brutal for you to even talk about an example. In your own life, you mean?
Yeah, no. So I just had a very difficult experience recently.
Huh?
I had a difficult experience recently. In
which you what?
Well, I've been volunteering to help some of the recently arrived refugees.
I remember you mentioned, yeah. So then?
So the last 2 weeks, I had to go to the benefits office to apply for food stamps with a couple of refugees.
Right, so then?
And so the last time I was there, it was so frustrating and so angering. We were there for 5 hours. And
so what happened? You gave up?
No, well, we. So
what's this example about perseverance, though?
So what happened was I was so discouraged and frustrated that I had to take a break.
Okay, so the enthusiasm is not the problem there; it's anger.
Yes.
Well, that's different discussion.
it was very frustrating, very difficult.
Frustration is a polite word for anger. And what anger is the response when your attachment didn't get what it wanted.
Right.
Do you hear it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite profound, simple words, but profound. So there you were, a good person, being honorable, trying to help human beings. That's virtue. That's not the problem ever. It's because your attachment, because you want it all to go lovely. And as soon as things don't go lovely, it's true, we give up. It's true, we give up, but we give up because of anger as much as anything. So the perseverance would be, that's a really good point. The perseverance would be just to, if you know it will bring the result eventually, then by not having the anger, which is by accepting this is the way it is and persevering through it. So it is a really good example, actually. And that's why we do give up. You're at the gym and it's just too much work. Your aversion is arising because your attachment's not happy. So you stop the machine. So it's the same thing. We mightn't think it's anger at the gym. It just sounds, oh no, too much work. It's because the moment attachment doesn't get what it wants, this is the point to see. The moment you're out of your comfort zone, aversion is what arises. This is too much. I can't cope. This is no good. Or plain, ordinary, just plain frustration, going crazy, the obstacles. So it is huge. This is the main obstacle for us, which means we've got to really become familiar with attachment. It's quite subtle, actually. And then the courage, yes, it's literally true to not give in to anger, not give in to it, just to persevere through. And that is also another way of talking about giving it, not getting frustrated and angry, is just is observing the walking into the problem, because what anger is resisting the problem. So that builds up all the craziness, doesn't it? So this is a very brave attitude. We have to really know what we can handle. And if you're not capable of giving up the anger, then maybe you've got to have a break, but you've got to know what the problem is and locate the problem, which is aversion. So when a problem comes, that's the first thing we do. We have a panic attack. If you can't do the gym, you have a panic attack. You meet the problem at the office, you have a panic attack. That's what anger is a panic attack, because we can't cope with a problem. We can't cope with being out of our comfort zone, which is attachment. So it's really, but can you hear that? And if you can see that and have courage, then you will persevere no matter what. But it takes really hard work. You've got to locate it exactly inside, Are we communicating? Good.
Yeah.
Perfect. Good. My goodness, we all understand it. But we've got to also pace ourselves. You don't go at the gym and keep rowing until your legs fall off, You've got to do 20, and then tomorrow you do 21. You go progressively. Do you understand? Did you get the food stamps in the end?
No, so what happened was they made us wait for 3 hours, and then we went to the window only for them to tell us that we had to do something online. And so we went to do something online, and the next step was to make a phone call for a phone interview. And for that, they put us on hold for like 2 hours.
No, I understand. I mean, this is so, and if you see it from the other perspective, just poor human beings doing their best in these big systems to try to be useful, but the systems just seem to be completely just mucked up completely, isn't it? I mean, what bureaucracy is just endless obstacles wherever you turn, dead ends, isn't it? And all the poor people who work there in those phones and doing all their jobs, for them to go crazy, easy.
I just can't understand how people who just arrived, who can barely speak.
Who what?
People who cannot speak English. I don't know how they apply for
Well, they
it.
can't.
I couldn't even get through it.
No, I understand exactly.
So
No, I can't. It's so interesting, isn't it? I know, it's yes. So very kind of you to persevere to help others.
Because, but you're right, because I realize it's all about my attachment.
That's right, exactly. Wanting
Because
things to be
I
nice.
wanted that to be simple.
That's right,
or
exactly.
easy,
Yes,
or
exactly,
I
exactly.
wanted a certain result.
That's right. That's exactly how we
So
all are.
I just felt, and I also feel so like incapable.
No, I understand that I can't do it. Not possible. No, you just you ticked all the boxes. Well done. Exactly. of how laziness works. And I understand it seems mean to call it laziness because we hear it as heavy, but it's just the opposite. It's not attachment, not getting what it wants is the real way to say it. Which is, it just shows how difficult life is. This ordinary life, not being in a war zone in Ukraine. Can you imagine? Isn't it? So every little minute we practice. And the other one is the thing that's important from this. We've got to try and see, forget the benefit to other people, but you would be the beneficiary of this practice. You'd feel better. It's so hard to see that though, because we hear it as judgmental and heavy and critical and self-judgmental and guilty and everything. It's also confusing. Yeah. It's a really good point. Thank you. What else, people? Anything online? Eileen, come on, give us one of your questions. You can guarantee Eileen will have a question. Go for it, girl.
All right. Going back to meditation, I have to put this out. I guess it's personal, but I'm trying to, my mind is a little bit, to say the least, right now. I've grasped onto something and the mind is just going off, on its own. So I can meditate right now. So I do.
Darling, I want to stop for a second, honey child.
Okay.
When you say I can meditate, we use this word in such a massive way. What do you mean by that, please?
All right. I sit down and the mind is
What kind of meditation, darling? There's a million kinds. What do you mean?
Okay, well, just sitting, breathing.
No, I'm not just sitting and breathing. What do you mean? Come on. What's the name of the meditation?
Well, Mahamudra, I guess it's.
Oh, is it?
I don't know. Is it sitting meditation? Sitting meditation.
It's a useless term, sitting meditation. We made it up in the West. Come on. What are you trying to do with your mind in this meditation? Let's just get down to it. What are you trying to do in your mind? What are you trying to
struggling. That's why I've gone back to mantra.
You're trying to get your mind to be concentrated is what you're trying to do. You're
Yes.
trying to concentrate on something. And then what the problem is, what happens?
Well, I guess I'm not giving it enough time because
Wait a minute, don't leap ahead. What's the problem? You mean your mind's not concentrated?
it's too out of control.
Okay, so Eileen,
The mind itself. I mean,
excuse me, honey, child, listen. Who suggested it should be anything but that? Where have you read that it should be better than that?
Right,
It's a serious question now. It's a serious question.
yes, yes.
Answer the question. Why do you assume it wasn't a good meditation?
Well, that's a very good, because I
Thank
guess
It's like you walk it, he's going to the bloody gym, Eileen, and you've only just started your boat riding, whatever your boat rowing, because I like the rower. You do your rowing and you stop after 5 minutes because that's the level you can get to. And you say, oh, I'm completely hopeless. I can't row the boat. Well, you started somewhere. You got to go somewhere.
yes.
So you got to go one step at a time. But we have this. So the mistake, my dear girl, is not that you couldn't concentrate. The mistake is having an assumption that you should have.
Yes.
Because your attachment always wants that to be nice. You're the same as him.
Yes, yes.
So please just bloody well persevere. Would you mind? Let's not give up.
Right.
Somebody said to me, oh, I tried to meditate yesterday and it didn't work. It's sort of like I tried to go to the gym and it didn't work because you're still 65 pounds overweight. Give it some time, Eileen.
Yes. Yes.
I'm really serious.
Yes. No, I know.
But so now let me say the second point.
Yes.
Actually, you should be delighted that you saw your crazy mind, because you need finally, once you've opened your eyes and go down to the kitchen, you got to be able to notice this uncontrolled mind of yours while you do the dishes, while you drive the car, while you talk to your cousin. Normally we're blind as a bat, but at least from our practice, we might not get much concentration, but you're making the effort. And then you bring this bonus of becoming familiar with your crazy mind. And you have to become familiar with your crazy mind to the most intimate degree, because that's what you're trying to conquer. You got to see every shitty little piece of your mind, your aversion, your this and your jealousy, your depression. If you can't see it, then you don't know what to change. So be glad at least that you're seeing your crazy mind and locate and identify each one of those crazy thoughts.
Yes. Thank you, Robina.
Because it's not at the core of your being. It doesn't define you, and it's all part of the deal. Are we communicating, Eileen?
Yes, we are. Thank you very much.
Do you have any other questions, or did I didn't make you finish? I'm sorry, as usual.
No, no, sometimes I just do mantra because it's a way of just getting a little bit focused.
That's okay.
But I suppose what you're saying is that you could do that initially, but then
also it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. I mean, you could watch your breath till the cows come home, and there's not that much virtue in it, quite frankly, because the thing that karmically, the thing that makes what we do beneficial is the motivation. So most of us don't have bodhicitta, don't have wisdom. So what we do mostly is stuff that, it's okay. But as Lama Zopa says, thieves need mindfulness, no big deal. But we get so caught up in being mindful as if some kind of holy thing. It's not. Whereas if you might sit there for 2 minutes and do a few mantras, because it's connected to the Buddhas, there's much more blessing for your mind. So it depends on what you're trying to accomplish.
Yes. Well, I don't have a definite answer for that, because I thought I would start doing some mantra just because I feel I can gain some confidence with it. That's
fine, but there's an assumption. Okay,
Yeah.
I mean, you've been doing this for quite a while, right?
well,
What's your Roughly, what's your daily practice?
Well, I do my altar, I bow, I try to do some mantra and read my refuge book and
Good, darling. So you're on the path, right?
yes, I'm
And
trying
it's
to.
one step at a time, right? It's one
Yes.
step at a time.
Yes,
Can you just not be a little bit humble and patient and know that by doing those practices, you're sowing seeds, you're programming yourself. You see, we totally forget that. In the West, we're junkies to get a quick fix now. That really is a serious problem. It's like
Yeah.
wanting to suddenly look better after the first day at the gym. You'll be disappointed, Eileen. You've got to keep going back and know and be happy. You do it every day. You create the merit of making offering to the Buddha. You take your refuge. You're doing it. You're putting all the steps in the right. You're going in the right direction, honey. So have a long-term goal and be happy you're doing it. And some days you might feel better, and other days you won't. It's sort of like you're growing a garden. You can't judge you're doing a good job by the fact that you feel good that day. You know, that was all sunny and lovely. Oh, I felt so nice doing my gardening. I don't care how you feel nice. You got to sow the seeds or you don't sow the seeds. It might be a muddy, dirty day with rain, but you put your seeds in. That's the real point, not how you feel, Eileen. We're such junkies for feeling.
thank you. Yes, I do.
Good. Well done. Keep moving.
Thank you.
What else, people? Who else has got a question? Mary's got a fan on. You don't have AC there? In Iowa or wherever you are? No AC. Oh, God almighty. I couldn't. The first thing I bought in my new little apartment in New York was nice new ACs, one for each room. They're very quiet, quite cheap. Why don't you get one? They're so cheap these days, Mary. My neighbor downstairs is a big fan, about 1940s fan. My whole house vibrates. I keep wanting to want to buy her a nice AC, but I don't want to interfere with her. I have to learn to put up with a big fan. Anyway, Mary, you have any questions? Mary, no questions?
Okay, well, I'm embarrassed to ask about this, but I'm just going to say it because I'm taking a time out today from everything related to caregiving and family because I cannot control my speech right now. As much as I try and I do really good, and then it is like, it is nuts. And
You abuse your mum?
yes.
She abuses her mum. What's new? We all abuse our mums, Mary. Our mums get it all, you know. Does she? I mean, you're really mean to her. You're really horrible.
No,
Just a little bit.
no.
No.
I'm not horrible. I'm not horrible.
What are
But
you?
sometimes I like yesterday, I got criticized for cleaning.
Your mum criticized you. Your mum criticized you.
Yeah.
Your mum gets angry with you.
Pardon me?
Your mum gets angry with you
Yes,
every day,
pretty much.
all the time.
Not all the time.
Cranky and old, is she?
She doesn't feel good. And I have 3 sisters and a brother, but I'm the primary person doing the cooking, the cleaning, the everything, handy person. And so I'm the one that's in her environment. I don't live with her. I'm in a separate environment, but
So what was the problem yesterday? You talked about the problem being your speech, but now you're talking about it being everybody else abusing you. So what is it?
oh, no, it's my speech.
What do you
Because I
abuse?
listened to the class in Australia the other night, and it's my speech.
Yeah.
It's I just don't know when to zip it sometimes.
Right, exactly. We understand. So then do you fight with them or just say a little word?
I say a little word and then I leave.
Yeah. So they all probably think you're a saint because you're not like shouting and yelling, are you?
No,
So what happened? So you needed a break today.
yeah.
That's all right, isn't it? That's reasonable. So what's the problem then? You feeling bad about not zipping your lip? But it's just once, Mary. I mean, you're doing pretty good. You're better than before, right? Aren't you? Better than you were. I mean, you're making progress like Eileen, aren't you? Huh? Yes, Mary? Come on then, please. Give yourself a break, dear. You can swear behind her back. Call her a fucking old, whatever you want to call her, behind her back so she can't hear you. I'm just joking. Well, this friend of mine in prison, I always talk about Sonny, who's this outrageous example. She wasn't a Buddhist. She wasn't in any particular spiritual path. She's on death row, accused of killing 2 policemen. Her husband he was executed. His head burst into flames. She lost her children. Her parents died. Like one nightmare after another. Talk about a problem. Just reminding. It's always good to remind a problem. And she was in a cell on her own with a Bible, year after year after year. I mean, you can't imagine the nightmare. And the way she put it was so astonishing. I was still blown out by it. She said, I knew, I'm getting to the point. I knew I couldn't change anything, but I knew that they couldn't take my mind from me. So I decided, this is the thing that's so shocking. I decided that I had to take responsibility for what was in my mind. I mean, this is so shocking, isn't it? She realized they're her thoughts. So she said she did yoga, she did her best to find her own way, learning to work on her mind, working, and said, and this is my point to you, she said she'd give herself permission. This is so amazing and so brave. I'd give myself permission to be raging angry for 5 minutes. I mean, this is so astonishing. You think about this, isn't it? That situation, and she would give herself 5 minutes to be completely enraged. And then I would stop and I go back to my inner work. I mean, I find that so astonishing, but it's funny and wonderful too. So honey, it's all right, Mary. Scream and yell and shout and call it every weird, wicked word you want, and your sisters as well, but then give it up and have a bit of a laugh. I mean, it's not really helpful, but if you're working that well, like she's working, listen to Sunny, all of us working. Do you understand, darling? It's all right. Don't exaggerate your badness like Eileen. That's, in a way, your main problem isn't that you couldn't zip your lip. The main problem is you're beating yourself up for it. Eileen's main problem isn't that she can't concentrate, is that she thinks she should. So we tend to be our own worst enemy in these ways. So give yourself a little bit of a break, Mary. I mean, your mum, how fortunate she is. All your sisters having you. I bet they think you're a little saint, right? Don't they? Come on, don't they, your sisters and your brother? Well, they're always moaning and complaining as well. Huh? Mary, talk to me.
Oh, my brother thinks I'm a saint. I'm not sure my sisters do, but I know
they know it.
Yeah, I think so. I know my mom knows it because, I get a lot done. I have a lot of energy. I think I blow them away by how much I get accomplished each day.
Well, good, that's good.
And so I don't know. I think they're just they don't understand why I have so much energy.
That's their problem. Don't worry about that part. That's yours. So you just you're lucky. And you give your mum a hug every now and again.
Yes.
Good. Okay, you're doing all right, Mary. Come on.
Okay, thank you.
Like Sunny did, 5 minutes and just scream and yell. That's so hilarious, isn't it? She said, I can never get over these words. I decided I had to take responsibility for her own thoughts, which means her rage, her despair, her grief, her loss. Can you imagine? I mean, I told her she's out of prison now. She's old in a wheelchair. She had an accident or something in Ireland. Her husband just died. And I said to Sonny, I don't think you realize how astonishing you are. She doesn't. That's incredible. That level of practice and not having any particular past. She's not being sort of, holy about it. I find it so astonishing, Can't believe it. I had to take responsibility for for the anger, for the rage, because you knew that were hers. They knew they were hers, and she was able to work on those. That's incredible. Anyway, example. What else, people? 2:40, time to go home, isn't it? No, 1:30, 2, 3. Now we've got 20 minutes. Yes.
Just wondering if it's ever a good idea, or should I avoid
Reminiscing.
Yes, even about good memories. Positive
No, I understand. I
memories.
understand.
A lot of times it'll lead to suffering. Sometimes, an example, I'll try to be brief. I'll have a bad interaction with somebody, with a problem, whatever. Maybe I'll look at it later on, but almost as a way of, well, was I wrong? Could I have handled it differently?
Well, that's not reminiscing. That's checking up on something and doing some analysis. That's handy. That's helpful. No, but just reminiscing sounds like what Apple does and keeps giving you bloody pictures to look. Here's some memories for you. I mean, I find that plain creepy, Like you have to live create new memories. It's the weirdest concept I've ever heard. It's so horrific for me. In other words, life is just a memory, just build up memories. It's so depressing. Of course, that's not reminiscing. That's checking up to see what you did. Nothing wrong with it. If you're just doing it just to wank it or shout and yell, that's no good.
That's also because you end up angry all over again.
No, well, then that's no good. That is just going around in circles. The only benefit in doing it is if you try and, to observe what your part in it, to try and separate the other person and your part, and then see, like with Sunny, what can I do with her mind? She couldn't change the rest, and that's the point of here. So to try and not have the conversation, if only this and he this and he this and she this, if I'd said this and done this, that's how we do it. And we're full of, as energy, even more anger. No, don't do that. That's useless. That's useless. And it's not easy when it's still vivid for you. But some people, something from 40 years ago is still vivid because they haven't let go of it. And we never, that's why people go crazy finally. There's just no thermostat, So the hard one, the huge one is just to try and see your part of it. They might be the worst creep on the planet. That's a fact. But you got to see what's in your mind. So what for Sunny's situation, there's no doubt that it was insanity. She was accused of murdering 2 policemen and she was innocent. Do you understand? The nightmare was clear, but she could change the way she saw it. That's the part that's outrageous, So you've got to keep owning your part. Do you see my point?
Yes.
Even if the person tried to kill you, they're bad, they're wrong, no question. But you've got to see our part of it. That what Sunny just said is so outrageous, and that's really the point. That's the essence of what Buddha's saying. No matter how bad or good it is out there, we have to try and extract ourselves and observe what's in here and own that. That's the job. And that's so rigorous and so hard to do because we're full of all the conversations and the rage and the hurt and the resentment and how dare and the rubbish. That just perpetuates the craziness. This is hard work, it really is hard work. Do you see? So do your best. Yeah. Talk to. Yes, sweetheart. The mic on, darling. Pop it on.
Okay.
There we go. Yes.
My question is related to the beginning of the talk, what you were explaining in the beginning, about how and I might be quoting this not correctly, but
Yes, go.
trying to explain
Yes.
what I'm you had explained that how through the Buddhist system your consciousness you can remove anger and jealousy and all these things.
Yes.
When I hear that, just how you had said, it might sound like science fiction. That's how it sounded like to me. And just how you had said, to me, it feels like, oh, Buddha might be able to do it, or they might be able to do it, people on the wall.
That's right.
But the question I have is, you've gone through the system. Have you reached a point of being able to do it?
I understand, darling. It's like, no, there's way to go, but I'm happy with my progress, put it that way. And then you've got to be that way. You just got to say that, whether it's grade 1 or grade 97, wherever you're at, you're on a path, you've got the long view. That's my view. I've jumped in the deep end of being a Buddhist. I'm completely buy into the system. It's all my working hypothesis. I look at the examples. I know I've got the potential and I'm moving towards it and I'm content with that. That's the point. Not have I achieved it yet. I'm on the path and I'm content so far. So far, so good. That for me is the point.
And you see that the system is working.
Well, okay, put it this way. I became a Buddhist when I was like 31, and I'm now 79 this year. And if there's no change, then I'm a bit foolish, don't you think? I'm bashing my head against a brick wall for 46 years. It's silly, don't you think? Okay, do you understand? Can be kind of realistic, one step at a time. And the thing is, it's like each has got a different path. People, like one of my sisters is so funny. I shouldn't talk about my sisters because they end up hearing about it sometimes because they hear it on Zoom or something. Doesn't matter. But none of my sisters particularly like spiritual path or anything. We're all ex-Catholics, right? And one of them doesn't like religion at all, but she's into neuroplasticity. You understand? That she can change. So just recently talking, some situation came and she said, I know I can't change, so I've got to do those new neural pathways. That's how she describes the work. All she's really talking about is what I'm saying by changing her mind. But she's, I'm developing a new neural pathway. But she's doing the same thing. I said, well done, Jude. We're doing the same thing. So what I'm getting at is we can do it. And and that's why I find, in the Buddhist system, that's why I find it's very powerful and beneficial just to read some of the experiences, to read about the yogis and people, to read about the experiences of the meditators and the holy beings who have accomplished it. And then to read about the path and how logically, in Buddhism, it's logical that the mind is not intrinsically negative and that virtue is at the core of our being. That's kind of a powerful concept, but to read the teachings about it and to think about it and have confidence in that principle is pretty encouraging. Do you understand? So one step at a time, sweetheart. All right. That makes sense? Good, I'm happy. What else? Huh?
Thank you, Venerable Robina.
Who's talking? Oh, yes, go, sweetheart.
On a gross level, I noticed that in my mind stream, there's not much attachment. So I don't experience much anger on a lot of common subject. And I noticed the attachment I have in reflection, there's a lot of lack of good karma.
What, darling? A what?
Lack of good karma, like lack of merit.
What? You always make these dramatic statements like this. I can tell it's you without seeing you. All your questions are the same. It's very fascinating. Go on. What's very fascinating? We all think a certain way. It's very fascinating. Go on. What's the question?
So the question is, how, so like, in a lot of subject, there's not much attachment, so there's not much anger, or there's not much mental suffering, and it's wonderful. And then, which means there's also no habit in doing that thing, those things.
What is what?
There's no habits.
Habits?
Like, you know,
Habit?
habits of attachment, habits of.
Okay, no, well, I might, before you even get to the second part, I would say you're speaking very, very dangerous.
Okay.
It's extreme. I'm going to be now rude to you. Extremely arrogant.
Okay.
If you want to look at what the end result is, your mind pervading the universe, seeing reality, all existence, manifesting your body, and even the lowest level bodhisattvas can manifest their mind in countless bodies, 100 bodies simultaneously. If you compare where you're at in relation to this, honey, you are dripping in fucking attachment.
Of course.
So no, excuse me, don't say of course. Don't say of course.
Yeah.
So then would you like to start the whole conversation and rephrase your question completely? Not telling us how special you are with giving up attachment.
Right.
So start fresh and give me ask me a question. No prelude, just ask a question. You always give a prelude. You always tell me something first and then ask a question. Just ask the question, honey. Cut to the chase. Sweetheart.
Besides pure practice purification.
Besides purification, yeah.
And acting in the opposite thing
Of counteracting the delusions, yeah.
Yes.
Besides purification and working on your mind and counteracting delusions, then is there anything left? No, there isn't. So just keep moving quietly, humbly, check the teachings you received, check that you've got the practices relation to what they're saying, and just move forward, sweetheart. And one step at a time. Be delighted with your progress and then look forward to the next level.
Okay.
That's it. But you always talk about karma and merit, like, I don't know what you mean by all that. Don't worry about it. Just keep moving, sweetheart. Why are you not content with your progress? We've discussed this before. You've got a path. You've got teachers. You're on the way. Why aren't you content with it? I said to you, I'm content with where I'm going. I'm not saying how far I'm going. Why can't you just be content with it? Why are you dissatisfied? Can you hear my question?
Yes, I would like to have less mental.
I beg your pardon?
I would like to have less mental affliction.
You don't have, well, excuse me, join the universe. That's why you're on the path.
Mm.
That's why you're on the path, because you want to get rid of afflictions. So where's your problem? You're on the path. It's a serious question. Why aren't you content with where you're at? It's a serious, serious question. You've just passed grade 7 in music. Why aren't you content with that as you move forward to grade 8? This is the question to you.
Mm.
Tell me the answer.
I know what I need to do,
And you are doing it.
not necessarily.
Oh, you mean you're lazy and you don't do your practice?
Yes.
That's a different discussion. You didn't ask me a question. You didn't say, Robina, I'm lazy and don't do what my teachers say. That's a different discussion. So please ask me your question again.
And I want to do my practice.
So you don't do your commitments in your practice and keep every day like you're committed to do. You're not keeping your word of honor. You're not keeping your samaya. Is that right? Is that correct?
I do know something.
You don't, I'm asking you, it's okay, you're on the path and you've got certain commitments. You've taken initiations and vows and different things, right?
Yeah.
Are you clear about your commitments? What you vowed to do and what you vowed not to do, and you've ticked the boxes. Are you clear about that?
Yeah.
And you're telling me you're not keeping the commitments. Is that what you're telling me? Clearly, very sincerely, just yes or no. Or are you keeping your commitments?
I'm keeping my.
Well, then what's your problem?
Because it's not enough.
That's right, okay. According to whose criteria is it not enough? According to whose criteria?
My criteria.
Thank you. And where did you set this? Like you're like Eileen. This is called it's not, you're arrogant and you've got self-pity. I'm just being, you're like everyone else. Don't worry about it. That's called self-pity. Oh, poor me. I'm working so hard. I've given up attachment on it, but I'm really not enough. Just shut up your moaning, darling, and learn to have the humility to tick the boxes, know you're doing your practice, and be content. We did it last week. Rejoice, delight in your progress. Can you do that, please?
Okay.
Did you bother doing it since we talked 7 days ago? I bet you didn't.
I did.
Well, then can you continue to do it, please?
Okay. Okay.
Because you don't have a problem, except self-pity and arrogance. All right?
Okay.
Are we communicating? I'm really serious, darling.
Okay. I know.
Thank you. Behind you, lady.
Lola.
I know that. I understand. Hang on, wait long, Lola. Behind you. Go, sweetheart.
I just want to know the difference between attachment and grasp.
Okay, sweetheart, that's a good point. The thing is that in English, there are so many words, so many variations of the terms, you know, for the Sanskrit and the Tibetan. And so here, in the way I'm using the word, when I say the word grasping, there's a very specific delusion they call it ego grasping. It's just a colloquial term for the root delusion, for the primordial feeling of a concrete me. It's very deep. So usually I use the term like that, ego grasping, this sense of I. And then when I say attachment, that's the main result of that ego grasping, which is this emotional hunger to get what that I wants. But grasping is another level of it. Attachment is just another word for another level of grasping as well. You can say like that. Do you understand, darling? Okay, good. Go on. Who's had a question here? Yes, you.
Can you talk about information?
I can do that in a second. I will. Who? Lola, where's Lola? Who? Lola. Go, sweetheart. Talk to me.
Hi, Robina. Thank you. So I was wondering if can we separate when we are trying to find out all the illusions and all the dramas, that is connected with consciousness? Like this thing then is supposed to be watching.
Darling, okay. The Buddhist word, the use of the word consciousness is synonymous with the word mind. So it's the part of the word mind or consciousness in Buddhism are used to refer to all your thoughts, your feelings, emotions, unconscious, subconscious, instinct, intuition, all of this entire spectrum of your inner being. It's not physical. So you've got your brain, you've got your nervous system, they're physical, and they work interdependently with your thoughts and feelings and emotions. But the Buddha's point is crucial in stating that your thoughts and feelings and emotions are not the physical. That's all. Are we communicating?
So the consciousness.
Yeah.
So the consciousness is related with the ego, is not physical.
Okay. The word ego is used very loosely here. We know it was Mr. Freud who kind of took the Greek word and used it. But when we say ego very loosely, the Buddhist view about your mind or your consciousness is you have positive qualities like love, compassion, kindness, intelligence, self-confidence. You understand, they are positive qualities of your consciousness, positive qualities of your mind. And then you have the neurotic parts of your mind, your ego grasping, this feeling of I, and then the hunger, the emotional hunger called attachment to get what that I wants, and the anger and the depression and the low self-esteem and the jealousy. They're all the voices of ego, if you like. And they're all in your mind, in your consciousness, but you can get rid of them. That's the way Buddhism talks. Do you understand?
I suppose. So it means then ego is part of the consciousness.
It's just the use of the word loosely, meaning the neurotic states of your mind. Yeah, they're
Yes,
all part of
yeah.
body. Yes, but you can get rid of them.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, hopefully.
Hopefully. That's right, Lola. Thank you. Thank you so much. Who had the mic? Where were we? Yes. Okay, reincarnation. Yeah, okay. I mean, this is the Buddhist idea is that your consciousness is not physical. It's not the handiwork of mummy and daddy. It's not the handiwork of a creator. It is not, as I said, not physical. It's the word that's used to refer to your thoughts, feelings, emotions, unconscious, subconscious, and it's got this much subtler level of capacity for cognition. And the capability we have in the Buddhist view is to develop this mind to perfection, to fully develop all the goodness and virtue and wisdom and clarity, and to rid the mind utterly of all the rubbish and fears and delusions and the voices of ego. And that's what a Buddha mind is. So this consciousness, this mind, that's our potential. So that's one way of talking about the mind. Another way of talking about the mind is this, like they even have a term, the mental continuum. It's like a river of mental moments. So we know very well in this life, in this day, today is by here in New York, it's the afternoon. And we know that our thoughts and feelings and emotions and unconscious and subconscious are this unbroken chain of mental moments, each moment going back to the second before, the second before, the second before. And if we tracked it back, we'd get to the morning when we woke up, and we know it was going throughout the night, and we track it back to yesterday, and we track it back the day before. So we've got this unbroken chain of mental moments, this mental continuum, this river of mental moments, whatever you want to say, that if you kept tracking, you get back to the first second of conception. So the question is, where was it? What happened the second before conception? Well, if you're a Christian, God came along and put a soul in the mummy and daddy's egg and sperm, and you started. If you're a materialist, mummy and daddy just had the egg and sperm, and that's enough, and then you started. But the Buddhist view is your body came from mummy and daddy. God has no role in it, no such being, and that your consciousness, tracking it back from this second in this unbroken chain of mental moments, you can track it back to a moment before conception, when your mummy and daddy didn't even think about you. We can track it back, and then a few weeks before that, in an unbroken chain of mental moments, clearly more subtle, you will find that that consciousness was in a previous body, and then you go through right back to the conception in that mummy's womb, and you go to a previous, and so on and so forth, unbroken, and you will keep looking. And of course, we have the big deal is, well, where did it begin? We want a big bang beginning, Buddha says it's a non-question. It's a silly question. Where did it start? We want a first cause. This is a massive, I find a fascinating discussion. The Christians make a huge point, and I think it's wonderful, these discussions. So they call it God. Everything is tracked back to God. The Hindus even say that. The Christians say that. The Muslims say that. It's all tracked back to this in superior being, not complaining. Just that's not the Buddha's view. Your consciousness doesn't come from anything other than your river of mental moments. So you say, well, where was the first big bang cause of mine? Well, you won't find one, petal, because it's the process of cause and effect. And as if you have cause and effect, by definition, each moment of your consciousness is the result of a previous moment. And that moment is the effect of a previous cause. And that moment was the effect of a previous cause. And you keep going, and you will never, ever find a first moment. Now that's insane to us, but it's irrational to think anything else the Buddha would say, because we all want a first moment. And that's the view of self-existence. That's the main philosophical view that Buddha is counteracting with his views of dependent arising and emptiness. So mind and matter, for that matter. As Dalai Lama said in all his conversations with the scientists, Big Bang, no problem, just not the first Big Bang, that's all. So you get back to that, you can get back, you will be able to logically get back in time to the first moment of this universe. You have to be able to. But then you have to find a moment before, and a moment before, and a moment before. So the Buddha's view is very simple. Mind and matter are beginningless, as crazy as it sounds to our poor minds. So the law that runs this mind of ours, this beginningless continuity of mental moments, is what Buddha calls the law of karma, cause and effect, such that whatever any consciousness, whether it's a rat or a dog or a spirit or who knows what, Whatever we think and do and say every millisecond is this process of creating causes, sowing seeds. And those seeds just inexorably and inevitably, unless you pull them out, will ripen in the future in your consciousness as another body, a type of experience. People love you, hate you, hurt you, harm you, like you, and a certain environmental result. So we keep producing ourselves in the future. And the present me is the fruit of my past. We are our own creators, is a simple way to put it.
I guess the question is, I understand that, and.
Oh, you
especially-
said.
But I have a follow-up question, and maybe it's a misconception that I have, because I understand that as it's physics, right?
I don't know if it's physics or not, but
Energy
it's,
matter conserved.
I don't know about that. We're talking about the mind, which is not physical. So that does not fit with physics.
But it's still conserved, like you said, it comes. My question is,
Uh-huh.
with the individuality, that's
What?
with individuality, does it mean that the consciousness of one being?
Yeah, that's the point. Yes.
completely went, or is it an amalgamation of?
No,
consciousness
no, that's not rational for the Buddha, because every millisecond of what you are is the fruit of what you put in your consciousness. If we're just an amalgamation, that means you can be angry and I will get the result. That's bizarre. It's schizophrenic. It's like I play the piano and you can start playing piano because I practice. That's weird. You only get the result of what you've done and thought and said. You only create the cause of what you will have and do in the future. We are these individual minds, billions of individual mind streams. The flower that you put the seed in the ground, the flower will only arrive, it won't come over there. So whatever ripens in your mind can only be the result of what you put in your mind. It's super personal. It has to be. It's not logical otherwise. Otherwise, it's not a law at all. Are we communicating?
Yeah.
That's the Buddha's view. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just the Buddha's view. That's all I'm saying.
But is there this, that my consciousness came from a living being?
Your conscious, this continuity river of mental moments. Think of it that way.
Okay.
It's like a river. And this moment of the river came from the previous, and before you know it, it's called Fred River, then it's called Jones River, depending on which country you're in. You can't find a beginning. It keeps going back and back. It's a continuity, mental continuum. It's very step by step, moment by moment, very sort of just goes back and back in a continuity. And you can track, if you had perfect memory, you could track it back perfectly. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. Time to go home. Yes, look at 3:04. Okay. I'm sure we talk about the same thing every time. I always feel like a fraud. Like you're going to catch me one day and say, you talked about that before. But you can see we need to, isn't it? Be content. I mean, this is such a serious point, to be content. It doesn't mean it's easy. It's the heart, and that means giving up attachment. That's where, that's you think you don't have much attachment. You're lying to yourself. Because for contentment is the fruit of not having attachment. You see, sweetheart? What you're saying is you haven't got much attachment to sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That's cool. I haven't either. But honey, child, I'm attached to getting what I want, when I want it, how I want it, exactly. We all got different style, you understand? But I'm learning to be content with who I am, warts and all. That's part of the brilliant process. And that means rejoicing in your good qualities. It's a conscious practice we have to do. It's incredibly important. Now, if you're not doing your job, you can't just say, oh, I'm really content. I'm playing tennis and I'm really content, but you don't go to tennis class. You're lying to yourself. If you are going and doing your job, then well done, girls. Be happy with it. That's humility. Low self-esteem and self-criticism are the flip side of arrogance. They're really tricky. Do you understand? Be content. It's huge practice, I can't tell you. Then you're eagerly looking forward to the next step, and you'll be even more content. By the time you get to the Buddha, you can't believe how content you'll be. All right? Good. Time to go home, people. Mary, you be content as well. And get some bloody AC, please. Her little chinks are all pink, from the hot. Come on, girl. I can't believe AC is so cheap these days. So I haven't seen my bill since it's been on 24 hours a day. I don't know. Okay, people, goodbye. Jangchub Semtrog Rinpoche. Make Panam Ke Guchi Ke Panyam Pa Me Payang. Okay, go. It's all right. And may we never develop, no, not that one. May we just delight in these seeds we've planted. This 90 minutes we've just done, not one single thought will go astray. Nothing ever goes astray, Buddha says. Everything gets stored here. So be delighted with that. And then we go home and we nourish the seeds we've just planted today, and we keep moving and be content and look forward to the next bit. Never give up, okay? Never give up. Thank you. Goodbye.